It's fascinating to be here. Thanks so much for the introduction. So I've been at Stanford for 20 years. And for these 20 years, what I've been doing is I studied how venture capitalists make decisions. And it turns out that they make decisions very differently from most other people. And then I've been teaching for 12 years the course on venture capital for entrepreneurs and founders, which is effectively how founders, what they should do to be able to raise money from angels, from venture capitalists. And in order to do so, they need to know how venture capitalists and how angels think. And luckily, this course has become one of the most popular at the GSB. Last year, we had 240 MBA students on the waitlist who could not get into the class. And this brought me to the idea that these principles that venture capitalists use, first of all, they fit the patterns. How do I know? Well, how do you study venture capitalist decision making? So we have the data set here in the Venture Capital Initiative at the GSB that I started some years ago. The best data set on venture capitalists and startups in the world. But that is not sufficient. Because a lot of stuff that venture capitalists do, that they study, the decisions that they make, is very difficult to study. As we say, it's qualitative, not quantitative. And so I went, and my team and I went into more than 400 venture capital firms. From small institutional funds to most successful venture capital firms, to those that no longer exist because they failed, to corporate VC arms of large companies and so on. And we studied how they make decisions, like the whole procedure of the decision-making process. And what I realized is that the best and the smartest VCs follow very specific patterns. That is very important to know both for founders, for investors, but it turns out for every single innovator around the world. For example, for innovators in large companies, from the intrapreneurs to their bosses, the CEOs and the board members of the company. And the realization of this, and also the realization that most students at Stanford even, and of course outside Stanford, cannot take my class, led me to write a book with my former student, The Venture Mindset, which is really the book is about how venture capitalists make decisions, why they're different. But more importantly, this book is not really for venture capitalists, even though my friends venture capitalists buying bulk copies right now. But it's really for founders and entrepreneurs who would like to acquire the venture mindset and be successful in fundraising and dealing with these investors, but also with everybody who is an innovator in a large company, in the government organization, and so on and so forth. Okay? And the book is not released yet, so I can't show you the physical book. It's coming out in the US on May 21st, and then it's going to come out late in the year in more than 100 countries in many languages. So the only thing I can show you now is this, which is a bookmark. It has not only my name and my co-author's name, but also the name of endorsements. So one is Eric Schmidt, the former chairman and the CEO of Google, who, there's one sentence here, but actually he sent a very, very long endorsement. And so before I go into this, what I would like to talk about today is several principles that I think every single founder in this audience, entrepreneur in this audience, innovator in this audience should know, that I've discovered after studying the venture mindset for 20 years. But likely I will not have time. I will leave these bookmarks, some of them over there, and this has a QR code. So I'm going to do something I've never done before, and likely I will not do after the book is released, ever. What I'm going to do is I'm going to first conduct a special webinar, or a number of webinars, which I will condense my entire VC class in a webinar, so that something that MBA students at Stanford, some MBA students study, and about 400 of my former students became founders of venture-backed companies, including founders of about 25 unicorns, and about 300 of them became venture capitalists. So I will create webinars for everybody who's going to buy a book. So if you buy one book, send a message with your order number on LinkedIn or by my email, or there's a mail on the website there, and you will get the link to sign up for the webinar. And also, when I teach my class in the fall at Stanford, I meet with every single student, and I talk with every single student one-on-one. I think I'm the only stupid professor who's doing that. Okay? for half an hour about their aspirations, about their startups, about their funds, and so on and so forth. Okay? So I kind of can't afford to meet with everybody who is going to buy the book. But what my course and I decided to do is to do masterclasses with small groups of 10 people, or about 10 people, for 1 hour and a half, for those who buy 10 books for themselves and as a gift for their friends. So if you want to participate in a masterclass, if you're local, we'll do it here at Stanford, just create a table, and then you'll pitch whatever you like, and we'll comment, and then you'll hear other comments as well. And if you're not local, then we'll do it on Zoom as well. So right now it's open. This is the second event I mentioned this. So yesterday already were a lot of purchases of 10 books. So once we hit our target, we will have to close it forever because of time constraints. So if you're interested, I'm going to leave some bookmarks here. Okay. So what is the venture mindset and why we care about this? Okay. So let me just to make sure that that's what I have. So share this in the community spirit. So why the venture mindset is important? First of all, the venture capital industry is unbelievably important for this country. Like, have you ever heard about French Google or Japanese Airbnb or Spanish Amazon? The reason is venture capital. Not just great entrepreneurs. They exist everywhere, but because of the venture capital. The venture capital industry is causally responsible for every second of public companies that ever became public in the United States in the last 50 years. And it's in large part causally responsible for up to 92% of private R&D that is happening in the United States right now. And in fact, 7 out of top 10 largest companies in the US are VC-backed right now. So they were VC-backed. They were started by venture capitalists. So venture capitalists are very unusual. The venture mindset is unusual because it faces an extremely unusual conditions. And the conditions that you're all facing as founders, innovators, and more large companies facing the era of disruption that reminding them what venture capital is facing every single day. And so that's why we wrote a book. By the way, the book is written in a very, very non-academic style, so that everybody who reads it says, we can't put it down. Okay. So we identified, based on this 20 years of research, 9 key principles of the venture mindset. And I like behaviors, I like actions. I don't like just ideas. So behind each principle, there are what I call playbook mechanisms, specific actions that you can implement as a decision maker to acquire the venture mindset. And there are 30 plus playbook mechanisms that we discuss in the book. Now, I will not have time in half an hour to talk about all of this, but let me acquire your patience and talk about some of them. So the first principle comes from the world of baseball. I'm sure there are many lovers here. Home runs matter, strikeouts don't. Which means that for venture capitalists, it's all about those important investments that can return the fund. So if you're a small fund of $25 million, whenever you evaluate a startup, you think about, can this startup, if successful, okay, and it's a big if, return my fund of $25 million. And if I have $2.5 billion fund, if I invest in you, can this return, in the best possible scenario, $2.5 billion? And that is very, very important for founders, I found out. Because whenever you talk to investors, you have to think about how they're going to make decisions. They're going to make decisions based on, first, their fund size. Second, what else is happening with their portfolio companies. What I find very often is that founders are too much concentrated on themselves. But one of the specific lessons I give my students is that whenever you meet a venture capitalist, less important with angels, critical with venture capitalists, find out from which fund they're investing right now. What is the total size of this fund? What is their dry powder, which is how much money they still have? And also, what is happening with other portfolios companies in the same fund? If they already have one unicorn that is potentially can return the fund, their decision-making is going to be very different about your company than if they have maybe already 7 investments and none of them are doing well. And this might happen as well. So therefore, one specific lesson for founders in the audience, if you deal with investors, find out about other companies whenever you deal with venture capitalists. Now, why home runs matter and strikeouts don't? And this is very counterintuitive. You know, when I talk to the CEOs of large companies, they're like, you can see steam coming out of their heads. Because, of course, for them, it's all about, we should not fail. Well, VCs fail all the time. So my data shows that between 82 to 90%, 93% of all the startups that VCs invest in an early stage fail, which means they return less than $1 per dollar invested. And the way I like to show it to my students is if we have 20 investments, then VCs will lose money, typically everything, on 15 investments. And for several investments, they might kind of return their money back, or they maybe will get, 2x, which is $2 per dollar. And this is typically, they think of as a bad outcome. And then there's only one investment which returns the fund, okay, 100x. And if you don't have 100x, this will not work. And again, why it's important from the point of view of the venture mindset, because the entire decision-making process is skewed towards trying to identify those home runs, potential home runs. And trust me, if they can increase the chance of identifying a home run by 0.2%, which seems like very small, okay, they will die for it. They will sell their soul for it, because that means they will be amazingly much better than everybody else, okay? But it also means that when you deal with the venture mindset, that also means that you have to be aware of how they structure their decisions, how, for example, they will evaluate you if you're a founder. For example, the very first question they will ask about the market size, okay? And if in the best possible scenario, the market size is not going to be large enough, and large enough is relative to their fund size, likely it's going to be a red flag for them, so they will not be interested, okay? And I can continue. There are about 25 red flags that they will identify using this home run principle, okay? And I'll skip various famous VCs who talk about these home runs. One of my favorites is Alex Rampell from Andreessen Horowitz, a friend of mine, who said, very notably, errors of omission are much bigger than errors of commission, which I think is actually quite smart. Interesting enough, if there are any innovators in large companies here, this is from Jeff Bezos and from Netflix's Reed Hastings. They, in fact, follow the same venture mindset. In fact, the most successful companies of today are VC-backed, and their bosses follow the venture mindset. They care about home runs. They don't really care about strikeouts, okay? And you might have heard about the power law. Well, you definitely heard about the normal distribution, okay? And the power law is something that, scientists never studied. Or indeed, they studied because power law was useful in studying earthquakes. Do you know that the most significant earthquake in every single year has more power released than all the other earthquakes combined? Okay? But that is kind of exception. Unlike you look at the world of venture capital. So this is from my data. We have data on every single venture investment in the United States in the last 40 years. Every single one. If you look at every single vintage year of early stage deals, and if you look at the best deal from the investor point of view, the best deal returned more than all the other investments in that vintage year combined. And the second deal returned more than all the other combined, and that is the power law, okay? And so the venture mindset is driven by home runs and the implications of the power law principle to this specific decision-making process, okay? So let me switch to another principle, which I think is really critical, and in my experience, many of my MBA students, but also many of the founders, really most of the founders I talk to, don't really understand this very well. First of all, let me give you a fact, which is, for every single one deal that venture capitalists, smart venture capitalists that follow the venture mindset invest, they on average consider at least 100 opportunities. Just think about this. It's 100 to 1, okay? And that is tough, but that is necessary, okay? By the way, if there are investors in this audience, what you really absolutely must do is to think about statistics. How many opportunities do you consider, okay, per one investment? And if it's less than 100, you should get worried. Now, for founders, what's happening is the following, is that VCs need to come up with a special procedure to get very efficiently from 100 to 1. It's tough, because if I spend 1 hour on 100, it's going to be a bad outcome. First, I will spend, 10,000 hours, okay? Second is that likely I will spend too much time on bad projects, not enough time on potentially good projects, okay? So therefore, there is a deal funnel. And kind of most founders are aware of the deal funnel. What they're not aware is that there are different procedures that venture capitalists use for every single part of the deal funnel. And to be brief, what's happening is that they use very different procedures in the top of the funnel, where you go from 100 to 10, to the bottom of the funnel, when they go from 10 to 1. And in fact, when I work with founders, with my students, the very first thing I teach them about this funnel is you have to be very careful about any signal that a venture investor that you talk to or venture firm sends you, every single action, to identify where you are in their funnel. Because if you're at the top of the funnel, they're going to use very different decision-making procedures than if you're at the bottom of the funnel. Very, very different. And I know you have the same startup, it's the same team, etc., but in fact the decision is going to be made differently. And therefore you have to switch quite quickly depending on where you are in the funnel. And there are various tricks to identify, talking to any venture firm, in which part of the funnel you are. But what is the difference between those kind of funnels? So roughly speaking, okay, the situation is a little bit more complicated. But roughly speaking, you can think of, and here, I like sports analogies. So we use baseball, now we're going to use Formula One. We can think about slow lane and a fast lane. And 100 to 10, I call it a fast lane approach. On average, VCs might spend less than 10 minutes when they're presented with an opportunity to make a decision. What kind of decision they make? They never make a decision to invest. The decision they make is whether to continue, looking at the opportunity. Okay? And therefore, as a founder, what is critically important for you is to identify how to make sure that they will continue considering your opportunity, your startup. By the way, very briefly, I also did interesting research on the cold calls. You know what cold calls are? Okay, so if you talk to VCs like in Silicon Valley, they will tell you, we never invest in cold calls. Like, we need warm introductions. So I kind of agree, warm introductions are good. But in fact, my data shows that 10% of the best VC deals ever, 10%, every 10th, is from cold call. Cold call, which is the founder, completely unknown to a venture capitalist, just, emails a venture capitalist. And the VC responds, and it results in a deal, and then it results in a unicorn deal and billions of dollars. So therefore, cold calls are important, but that means that you need to stand out in a very specific way as a founder. Just the threshold is higher. And the approach they use in this fast lane is the red flag approach, or why should I not invest? Okay? And we devote quite a lot of time in the book about this, because that's actually critical for everybody to know. Again, for founders, but also everybody who would like to acquire the venture mindset, it's quite critical. 10 to 1, suddenly you switch. Here is a trick. If you are a founder and you talk to any associate or any partner in a venture firm, and suddenly they want you to introduce you or your team to another partner, that means that you pass to this. Because the most valuable thing that venture capitalists have is their time. And this means that if I'm a partner of the VC firm, maybe with 10 partners, and I introduce to another partner, you're already interesting enough. So we're going to switch from the question, why should I not invest, to why am I greedy to invest, as my VC friend tells me, okay? So, or why we're anxious to invest. And this is slow and careful due diligence. On average, for every single completed deal, venture capitalists spend 118 hours. Just think about this, okay? 118 hours. In fact, a friend of mine, famous venture capitalist, co-founder of Emergence Capital, Brian Jacobs, estimated that Emergence on average spends up to 400 hours in due diligence on every single deal that they eventually make, okay? So expect an extremely fast decision-making initially and extremely long, elongated decision-making later on. And you have to prepare differently for the fast one and for the slow one. Now, a lot of people talk about, well, you know, in reality, this is a great founder. He or she meets a venture capitalist, and the venture capitalist looks at the founder and says, oh, wow, I love this deal, and I'm going to write you a check. Okay? First of all, it's a myth. Second, even if this happens, and I will give you an example in a second when it happened, it's still a myth. Here is an example that I like. This was my first case study. As you know, you kind of like your first things. Anybody here uses Dropbox? Okay. So Dropbox was founded in 2007, the year when iPhone was released. And the fact that there will be file sharing was obvious to everybody, even though it wasn't possible yet. In fact, there were more than 85 startups. More than 85 startups, think about this, okay, that were working on file sharing market. Market did not exist yet, everybody thought it was huge. An investor who was then at Sequoia Capital decided, that's very interesting idea. There's a huge market. He spent 6 months developing thesis, as they say, okay? He met with 55 file sharing startups. He did not invest in any. 55 out of 85, okay? 6 months passed. And then a friend of his introduced, that was kind of semi-cold call, introduced him to two guys who didn't have money, so therefore they came from Boston on Greyhound. Do you know what Greyhound is? Yeah, okay, great. So they didn't have money to fly, so they took Greyhound. They came to San Jose because Greyhound doesn't go to San Francisco. That's too fancy. Okay. And they met with this guy, and yes, in 3 minutes, the guy decided actually 3 minutes he decided I'm going to invite them for pizza. And in 45 minutes, he decided to invest. And so an outside observer might think, well, this is like a classical Silicon Valley story. You meet a founder, you fell in love, you invest. Absolutely not. You prepare for 6 months. By the way, why the investor decided to invest? That's a very unusual answer, okay? Not because founders were passionate or because the market was huge or because the business model was great. There was no business model. There was no product. There was no prototype. Because he met with 55 teams, and every single time he was meeting, he knew more than the founding teams, because he was interested in this market, and he was learning a lot about the ideas, the implementation, etc., etc. He met with this guy, and in 3 minutes, he learned something from these two gentlemen that he did not realize. And in 45 minutes, he learned much more. So he decided to invest. So in fact, when I coach founders, I tell them, whenever you meet with an investor, do your due diligence on the investor, but also make sure, and I call this having the prepared mind. Prepared mind. Make sure that you know the stuff so deeply that you're going to surprise investors, or you're going to tell them something that likely they don't know. And that is true across all the sectors. One of my former students is a major biotech investor. And he took the venture mindset fully on board. He said, if I meet with a biotech founder and who has a PhD in genetics, okay, and I'm not going to learn anything new from this founder, I'm going to pass. It is not a great interest. Okay. Okay, I can talk about this for hours because this is, of course, an important principle. Now let me switch to another principle which is principle 5, bet on the jockey. Now, we all know what jockey is. Again, this is another sport, horse racing. To write a book, I became an expert on horse racing. But if you would like to find out about horse racing, you need to get a book. Now, jockeys are, in the VC world, founders, but more importantly, also team members. Quick advice for you if you're a founder here. When you meet with an investor, showcase your team. These days, it's very difficult. It's easy to get funding when you're at an angel stage. At the VC stage, very difficult to get funding if you don't showcase the team. So think carefully about your team composition, who they are, how you attract them, and so on. So I think that's very, very important. And the horse is everything else: business model, product, technology, market, and so on. Now, overwhelmingly, the venture mindset believes that the team is more important. And this is something that I think is really, 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 really different from the traditional mindset and the venture mindset. In the traditional mindset, idea is important. So when I work with the CEOs of large companies, and I work with a lot of large global companies, what typically happens is that they identify a great project, okay? And then they will debate the project, they will come up with a lot of financial analysis, and if they decide to go ahead, they will identify the team. Maybe there will be project head, and then the project head will identify the team. So here, in this world, in the world of innovation, disruption, and so on, ideas are not worth much. So often, I have the passionate Stanford MBA students come into my office and say, I have this great idea, Professor Ilya, this amazing idea, okay? The idea is amazing, but what is the feed between you and the idea? How are you going to implement it? How are you going to execute it? Why it's good for you? What unfair advantage do you have? That is the critical question that every single founder should ask. So ideas are overrated. That's one of the big learnings I have from the venture mindset research of 20 years. It's more important is the team that is going to implement that idea. Going back to my Dropbox story, where there were many, 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 many ideas. There were like 80 teams. Only 2 succeeded. So Dropbox was one of them. Okay? And as a result of this, the venture capitalists really think about why the team is trustworthy. So I'm getting, actually today before coming here, I had 2 calls. So one of the services I'm doing to my former students is whenever venture investors invest in them, I'm willing to serve as a reference. So I had 2 calls today from 2 very different VCs who were referencing the students. And what kind of questions they asked me? There were no questions about the startup, even though I'm also an advisor and an investor in the startups. The only questions they asked me, so Professor, do you remember when this guy was a student, like how he operated with the team? Did he stand out as a leader? How resilient was he? What were his major weaknesses? Did he have charisma? So anything else that they can kind of weed out of me, squeeze out of me about the various personal characteristics of the founder that they believe they're going to be important. And there is a variation. There are variations what they ask, but you know what? There is the same pattern. And I had maybe 3,000 conversations over the years with these VCs, and there's all the same pattern. So think about this. I think that is a very important part of the venture mindset. Am I out of time? Wrap it up. Okay. Well, now you definitely need to buy a book because I had another principle. Let me skip this. So let me mention the next principle, and then I will wrap it up. So one of the principles which actually I find the most critical for VCs. So if you work in a group here, making decisions, this is the most principle for you to find out. In fact, in the entire book, if you're a founder, it may not be the most important principle. If you're a venture capitalist in a 5-person partnership, if you're the CEO of a company that makes decisions in groups, if you're in the Department of Defense, okay, deciding to make decisions in groups, this is by far the most important decision. I find in my research that this is the single most important decision-making procedure that differentiates successful VCs from everybody else. And the principle I call agree to disagree. And in one sentence, everybody else, including the traditional mindset, work because of consensus. Like, the 5 of us have to agree it's a good idea. Okay? In the venture mindset world, that is a bad idea. Consensus is bad. And therefore, venture capitalists agree to disagree. Now, it's very simple to say so. In fact, implementation of agree to disagree, even in a startup, is very, very complicated. Okay? So let me stop here. There are bookmarks. Please share with other people, and I believe Raphael will send the QR code as well. And just to remind you, if you buy one book, make sure to send an email, LinkedIn message, etc., so that it is, so you get a link to the webinar. You can sign up for the webinars. And if you would like a masterclass, then you must buy 10 books until this offer runs. So right now, do it today. I guarantee that it will be there. Okay, thank you.